Hello, beautiful listeners, and welcome back to Green Earth Essentials. Today, we're diving into a fascinating and crucial topic: how Indigenous knowledge can help heal the earth. Across generations, Indigenous communities have practiced sustainability in ways that modern science is only beginning to fully understand. From agriculture to water management to conservation, Indigenous wisdom offers practical, time-tested solutions for some of today's most pressing environmental issues. But how can we apply this wisdom in our own lives? What can we learn from these communities, and how do their traditions compare across different regions of the world? We're going to explore all of that in today's episode. Indigenous peoples of North America have developed deep ecological knowledge systems over thousands of years, shaping the land through sustainable practices that support biodiversity, prevent environmental degradation, and maintain a balance between human needs and nature. Their wisdom, rooted in observation, respect, and reciprocity, offers powerful lessons for modern conservation efforts. Many Indigenous tribes across North America, including the Yurok, Karuk, Miwok, and Choctaw, practice controlled burns to manage forests, grasslands, and prairies. These low-intensity fires cleared out underbrush, prevented catastrophic wildfires, and encouraged the growth of fire-resistant plants such as oak and pine, which provided food and materials for their communities. Controlled burns also helped regenerate essential food sources like acorns, berries, and edible roots, while creating open spaces that attracted deer and other game animals. Today, scientists and forest management agencies are working with Indigenous knowledge keepers to reintegrate this practice, particularly in regions like California, where devastating wildfires have become more frequent due to fire suppression policies. The Haudenosaunee Iroquois Confederacy, which includes the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and Tuscarora nations, developed a sophisticated companion planting system known as the Three Sisters. This method involved planting corn, beans, and squash together in a way that enhanced soil fertility and crop productivity. The corn provided a natural trellis for the beans to climb. The beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, enriching it for future crops, and the squash spread along the ground, acting as a living mulch to retain moisture and suppress weeds. This system exemplifies the indigenous practice of reciprocity, where plants support one another and create a sustainable food source without depleting the land. The Plains tribes, including the Lakota, Blackfeet, and Cheyenne, depended on the American bison for food, shelter, tools, and clothing, unlike European settlers who nearly drove the species to extinction through overhunting. Indigenous groups practiced selective hunting, taking only what was needed and ensuring that the herds remained strong. Additionally, the movement of buffalo across the prairies naturally fertilized the land, aerated the soil with their hooves, and helped maintain healthy grasslands. Many tribes today are leading buffalo conservation efforts, reintroducing them to their ancestral lands to restore ecosystems and cultural traditions. Tribes like the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, and Seminole have long been stewards of wetlands, rivers, and lakes, understanding their importance for biodiversity, clean water, and food security. The Anishinaabe of the Great Lakes region continue to practice wild rice cultivation, a tradition that sustains both their diet and the health of freshwater ecosystems. This involves hand harvesting rice without damaging the plants, ensuring they continue to thrive for future generations. The Seminole people of Florida historically built chickee dwellings on stilts above waterlogged areas and developed floating agricultural plots to adapt to wetland environments. Their sustainable use of waterways contrasts sharply with modern drainage and development projects that have disrupted natural water cycles, leading to habitat loss. Indigenous coastal communities such as the Tlingit, Haida, and Coast Salish develop sustainable fishing techniques that ensured long-term food security without depleting marine populations. They use selective harvesting methods such as weirs and fish traps, which allowed smaller or breeding age fish to escape and reproduce. This contrasts with modern industrial overfishing, which often depletes fish stocks and harms entire ecosystems. Similarly, the Inuit of the Arctic relied on seasonal hunting and respect-based wildlife management. They understood animal migration patterns and only hunted what was necessary for survival. Today, Inuit-led conservation efforts play a crucial role in protecting Arctic ecosystems and advocating for sustainable wildlife policies in the face of climate change. Many indigenous groups view land not as a resource to be exploited, but as a sacred entity that must be cared for. The Hopi of the Southwest practice dryland farming using techniques such as waffle gardens and check dams to capture water in arid climates. The Apache and Pueblo peoples built sophisticated irrigation systems that allowed them to grow crops in the desert without depleting natural water sources. The Cherokee developed forest gardening, where they selectively cultivated wild plants rather than clear-cutting land for agriculture. This approach allowed them to maintain natural food sources while preserving the integrity of the forest. Indigenous communities exist on every continent, each with unique traditions, yet a shared deep connection to the land. Their ways of life are deeply intertwined with their environments, leading to generations of ecological wisdom that has preserved ecosystems for thousands of years. Aboriginal Australians have maintained intricate land and water management systems for over 60,000 years. Their knowledge of seasonal burning, known as fire stick farming, helps sustain grasslands, prevent the spread of uncontrolled wildfires, and create open spaces for hunting. They also engineered sophisticated aquaculture systems such as the budgebim eel traps, which allowed them to sustainably harvest fish for generations. These practices are now being studied for their potential role in modern land conservation. In the Arctic, the Sami people practice sustainable reindeer herding, carefully rotating grazing lands to avoid overgrazing and allowing vegetation to regenerate. They have also developed methods to predict environmental changes by closely observing natural indicators such as animal migration patterns and ice conditions, an invaluable skill in the face of climate change. The Maasai of East Africa have traditionally used rotational grazing to preserve grasslands and prevent desertification. Their semi-nomadic lifestyle ensures that pastures are never overused, allowing plant life to recover between grazing cycles. This approach, which contrasts with modern overgrazing and land degradation, has been praised as a model for sustainable livestock management. In the Amazon, indigenous tribes such as the Kayapo and Yanomami have cultivated diverse food forests, creating one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth. Their traditional agroforestry systems involve planting a mix of fruit trees, medicinal plants, and crops in a way that mimics natural ecosystems, preserving soil health and preventing deforestation. These food forests not only provide sustenance, but also support thousands of plant and animal species. From the deserts of North Africa, where the Berber people use water harvesting techniques to sustain agriculture in arid conditions, to the Pacific Islands, where Polynesian communities developed fish pond aquaculture to ensure a steady food supply. Indigenous knowledge offers a wealth of time-tested environmental solutions. Despite facing challenges such as land encroachment and climate change, indigenous communities continue to be at the forefront of environmental protection and sustainable resource management. Indigenous ecological knowledge is grounded in sustainability principles that can help guide modern conservation efforts. At the core is the principle of reciprocity with nature, taking only what is needed while ensuring resources can regenerate. This practice goes beyond conservation. It fosters a relationship of mutual care between humans and the environment, emphasizing that the well-being of people and ecosystems are intertwined. For example, many indigenous communities engage in ceremonial harvesting, where gratitude and spiritual respect for the land accompany the gathering of food or materials, reinforcing a sense of responsibility. Biodiversity conservation is another critical lesson. Unlike industrial agriculture, which often relies on monocultures that deplete soil nutrients and increase vulnerability to pests, indigenous farming and harvesting methods prioritize species diversity. Techniques like intercropping, agroforestry, and rotational foraging ensure that no single resource is overused. In the Amazon, indigenous peoples cultivate food forests, diverse plant systems that mimic natural ecosystems, sustaining soil fertility while providing abundant food. Another fundamental principle is following seasonal cycles to determine planting, harvesting, and hunting times rather than imposing rigid schedules dictated by commercial demand. This approach aligns with natural rhythms, allowing ecosystems to replenish themselves. Holistic land stewardship is central to indigenous knowledge, viewing land, water, and wildlife as interconnected rather than as separate, exploitable resources. Many indigenous communities consider rivers, forests, and animals as relatives rather than commodities, leading to a stewardship model that integrates traditional ecological knowledge with observation-based adaptation. These lessons challenge modern industrial approaches that often prioritize short-term economic gain over long-term sustainability. By integrating indigenous ecological wisdom with contemporary conservation strategies, societies can develop more resilient environmental policies that respect both nature and the communities that have stewarded it for generations. Modern science continues to uncover the benefits of indigenous practices. Controlled burns used by indigenous communities in Australia and North America prevent catastrophic wildfires while promoting the growth of fire-resistant plant species. Studies have shown that indigenous agroforestry methods, such as those in the Amazon, can increase soil fertility and crop yield without deforestation. Rotational grazing, a method used by the Maasai and other indigenous pastoralists, helps prevent soil degradation and ensures sustainable food production. Even ancient water management systems, such as the Andean Weru raised fields, are being re-examined as potential solutions for modern agricultural challenges. Long before modern conservation efforts, ancient civilizations around the world developed sophisticated techniques to manage their natural resources sustainably. These early societies understood the importance of working with nature rather than against it, using methods that preserve soil fertility, protected water sources, and maintain biodiversity. From the intricate agricultural terraces of the Inca Empire to the advanced irrigation systems of Mesopotamia, these practices demonstrate a deep ecological wisdom that still holds valuable lessons today. By exploring how ancient peoples lived in harmony with their environments, we can gain a greater appreciation for the timeless principles of sustainability and how they continue to influence indigenous and modern ecological practices. The Maya developed a highly sophisticated agroforestry system, blending agriculture with natural ecosystems. Instead of large-scale deforestation, they cultivated diverse forest gardens where crops like cacao, avocado, and maize grew alongside medicinal plants and fruit-bearing trees. They also used raised fields and canal systems to prevent soil depletion and improve irrigation, an early example of permaculture principles. The Inca engineered terrace farming, which prevented soil erosion and maximized food production on steep mountain slopes. These terraces improved water retention and reduced the risk of landslides, allowing crops like potatoes and quinoa to thrive. They also developed a vast irrigation network that channeled glacial meltwater to their fields. Their food storage techniques, such as freeze-drying potatoes, helped them withstand droughts and food shortages. Long before modern conservation, ancient Amazonian peoples created terra preta, or dark earth. This rich, fertile soil was intentionally cultivated by adding charcoal, organic waste, and bone to the earth, enhancing its nutrient content and long-term fertility. Unlike typical rainforest soil, which is naturally poor in nutrients, terra preta remains productive for centuries. This ancient soil-building technique has inspired modern regenerative agriculture. The Nabateans who built the city of Petra were masters of water conservation in the arid desert. They constructed an elaborate network of underground cisterns, reservoirs, and channels that captured and stored rainwater, preventing evaporation and ensuring a stable water supply for drinking and irrigation. Their methods allowed them to thrive in one of the harshest climates on Earth. The Zuni and Hopi people in the southwestern United States developed waffle gardens, a traditional dryland farming technique where small square garden beds are surrounded by earthen walls to retain moisture. They also practiced floodwater farming using natural land contours to direct seasonal rains to their crops. These methods allowed them to cultivate corn, beans, and squash in arid environments with minimal water use. Many West African societies developed sustainable agroforestry systems where crops were integrated with tree cultivation. The Yoruba, for example, planted oil palm, cola, and cocoa trees in mixed forests that mimicked natural ecosystems. Their traditional knowledge of soil fertility and crop rotation helped maintain healthy farmland for generations. China's ancient agricultural traditions, including rice paddy farming, used water-efficient terracing and natural fertilization techniques. Farmers also practiced silk farming, integrating mulberry trees with sustainable land management. In addition, they used fish farming with rice paddies, a method where fish help fertilize crops while controlling pests. The Maori people developed sustainable resource management systems called rahui, a form of conservation that temporarily restricted hunting, fishing, or harvesting in certain areas to allow ecosystems to regenerate. They also practiced Marukai, a form of traditional gardening using raised beds and crop rotation to maintain soil health. These ancient techniques, many of which are still used by indigenous communities today, offer valuable insights into sustainable land and resource management. By studying and reviving these methods, modern societies can combat climate change, soil degradation, and food insecurity while honoring the wisdom of past civilizations. Despite vast differences in geography, climate, and cultural traditions, indigenous communities worldwide share core sustainability principles that reflect a deep respect for nature and a commitment to long-term environmental stewardship. One of the most universal themes is respect for the land, where nature is seen as a living entity rather than merely a resource for human exploitation. Many indigenous worldviews recognize the earth, rivers, and animals as relatives rather than commodities, fostering a sense of kinship with the natural world. For example, in Maori traditions, land is not just property, but an ancestor, deserving of care and reverence. Similarly, in many North American indigenous cultures, the phrase Mother Earth is used to express a reciprocal relationship in which humans are caretakers rather than dominators. This belief underpins many traditional conservation practices, from waterway protection to wildlife management. Many indigenous communities also emphasize sustainable harvesting, only taking what is needed to ensure future generations have access to the same resources. A key factor in sustaining these practices over time is intergenerational knowledge sharing, ensuring that environmental wisdom is passed down through storytelling, ceremony, and hands-on learning. Many indigenous cultures do not rely on written records. Instead, they pass down knowledge through oral traditions, apprenticeships, and community teachings. Among the Haudenosaunee, the seventh generation people emphasizes making decisions with the well-being of descendants in mind, reinforcing long-term sustainability. Similarly, the Anishinaabe people of North America share environmental knowledge through seasonal gatherings, where elders teach younger generations about plant medicine, fishing techniques, and land stewardship. Another unifying theme is holistic thinking, which recognizes that ecosystems function as interconnected networks rather than isolated components. Many indigenous cultures approach conservation with an understanding that land, water, plants, animals, and people are part of a single interdependent system. This contrasts with industrial approaches that often fragment ecosystems for short-term gain. By recognizing these shared themes across cultures, we can see how Indigenous knowledge offers not just historical insight, but practical solutions for addressing modern environmental challenges, as climate change, deforestation, and biodiversity loss threaten ecosystems worldwide. Indigenous-led conservation efforts provide valuable models for sustainable living, resilience, and environmental justice. While not everyone can live like an Indigenous community, there are many ways to incorporate their wisdom into daily life. Supporting regenerative agriculture, which mimics indigenous farming techniques, helps restore soil health and biodiversity. Practicing seasonal eating reduces reliance on industrialized farming, which is often destructive to ecosystems. We can also embrace land stewardship by supporting reforestation projects, reducing waste, and advocating for policies that protect natural ecosystems. Even something as simple as learning mindful consumption, buying only what we need, and avoiding over-extraction of resources aligns with Indigenous sustainability principles. Despite their invaluable contributions to sustainability and environmental stewardship, Indigenous communities around the world face numerous challenges that threaten their ability to maintain and pass down traditional knowledge. These challenges are deeply rooted in historical injustices, ongoing land dispossession, climate change, and systemic barriers that continue to suppress Indigenous voices and practices. One of the most pressing threats is land loss and resource exploitation. Indigenous territories are often rich in natural resources, making them targets for deforestation, mining, industrial agriculture, and oil extraction. Large-scale logging and infrastructure projects displace communities, disrupt ecosystems, and sever the deep connection Indigenous peoples have with their lands. For example, in the Amazon rainforest, illegal logging and land grabs threaten the livelihoods of Indigenous groups such as the Yanomami and Ashaninka, whose survival depends on the health of the forest. Similarly, in North America, pipelines like the Dakota Access Pipeline, which the Standing Rock Sioux opposed, pose risks to water sources and sacred lands. Climate change presents another serious challenge. Rising temperatures, shifting weather patterns, and natural disasters disproportionately affect Indigenous communities, many of whom live in ecosystems that are particularly sensitive to environmental change. In the Arctic, melting ice threatens the traditional hunting and fishing practices of the Inuit, while in the Pacific, rising sea levels endanger coastal and island nations such as the Marshallese, who may be forced to relocate. Droughts and unpredictable rainfall patterns also impact Indigenous farmers such as the Maasai in East Africa, whose rotational grazing systems depend on reliable water sources. Another significant barrier is cultural erasure and systemic oppression. Colonial histories of forced assimilation, displacement, and violence have weakened the transmission of Indigenous ecological knowledge. In many regions, governments and institutions historically outlawed Indigenous languages, ceremonies, and land management techniques, further marginalizing these communities. In Australia, for instance, Aboriginal fire stick farming was banned for decades, contributing to the increased severity of wildfires. Similarly, in the United States and Canada, Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their families and placed in residential schools where they were forbidden from speaking their languages or practicing their traditions, disrupting the intergenerational transfer of knowledge. Despite these challenges, Indigenous communities worldwide are actively working to preserve, revitalize, and share their traditional ecological knowledge. Many groups are reclaiming their lands through legal battles and treaties, allowing them to restore traditional land management practices. The Yurok and Karuk tribes in California, for example, have successfully reintroduced cultural burning to reduce wildfire risks and improve forest health. Indigenous-led conservation initiatives are also gaining global recognition. The Great Bear Rainforest Agreement in Canada is a landmark example of Indigenous governance, where First Nations manage millions of acres of coastal rainforest in collaboration with conservation groups and governments. In Kenya, the Indigenous-led Masai Mara Wildlife Conservancies protect biodiversity while allowing traditional pastoralist practices to continue. Organizations and policy advocates are working to support Indigenous rights and recognize their critical role in global sustainability. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, adopted in 2007, affirms Indigenous peoples' rights to self-determination, cultural preservation, and land protection. Similarly, initiatives like traditional ecological knowledge programs integrate Indigenous wisdom into scientific and environmental policy making, ensuring that Indigenous voices are included in conservation efforts. Education and storytelling are also powerful tools in preserving Indigenous knowledge. Many Indigenous groups are establishing language immersion programs, community-led schools, and digital archives to document oral histories, traditional ecological practices, and sustainable farming techniques. Platforms like the Indigenous Climate Action Network and the Decolonial Atlas share Indigenous perspectives on environmental issues, helping to bridge the gap between traditional and modern conservation efforts. By recognizing and supporting these efforts, society can help ensure that Indigenous knowledge is not only preserved, but also integrated into modern sustainability strategies. The wisdom of Indigenous peoples is not just a historical legacy, it is a living, evolving guide for creating a more sustainable and just future. Across the world, Indigenous communities are working to reclaim, restore, and revitalize their ancestral environmental practices. Despite centuries of colonization, land dispossession, and cultural suppression, Indigenous knowledge is experiencing a resurgence as people recognize its value in addressing today's ecological crises. In North America, many Native American tribes are reviving traditional land management techniques. Controlled burns, once outlawed by government policies, are now being reintroduced to mitigate the risk of catastrophic wildfires. Tribes like the Yurok and Karuk in California are leading efforts to restore fire as a tool for maintaining healthy forests and grasslands. Similarly, Indigenous-led food sovereignty movements are encouraging the return to traditional crops like the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash, which support soil health and biodiversity. Aboriginal firestick farming, an ancient practice of controlled burning to shape the landscape and promote biodiversity, is gaining renewed recognition in Australia. Indigenous-led ranger programs such as the North Australian Indigenous Land and Sea Management Alliance are blending traditional knowledge with modern conservation efforts to protect fragile ecosystems. These programs employ Indigenous people to manage lands in ways that align with their cultural traditions. In the Arctic, the Sami people of Scandinavia are advocating for sustainable reindeer herding practices amid climate change threats. They are integrating modern tracking technology with centuries-old migratory patterns to ensure their herds can continue to thrive in shifting environmental conditions. Their deep understanding of seasonal changes and the land's carrying capacity remains essential in navigating Arctic conservation challenges. The Maasai of East Africa are revitalizing rotational grazing systems to prevent desertification and protect grasslands, once discouraged in favor of Western-style ranching. Their method of moving cattle strategically across the landscape is now recognized as a key way to prevent overgrazing and maintain soil health. Indigenous organizations are working with governments to secure land rights and promote traditional grazing techniques as a sustainable alternative to industrialized livestock farming. Indigenous communities of the Amazon are reclaiming stewardship over their lands, fighting against deforestation and restoring agroforestry traditions. Groups like the Ashaninka and Kayapo are cultivating food forests, replanting deforested areas with native species, and using traditional knowledge to maintain soil fertility without the need for chemical fertilizers. Their deep understanding of biodiversity is being incorporated into conservation efforts with Indigenous-led organizations partnering with scientists to protect and restore vital rainforest ecosystems. These revitalization efforts highlight the resilience of Indigenous communities and the enduring relevance of their ecological wisdom. By recognizing, respecting, and supporting these initiatives, the broader world can learn how to live in greater harmony with nature. Governments, conservationists, and environmental organizations increasingly acknowledge that Indigenous leadership is essential in tackling climate change, biodiversity loss, and land degradation. The more we amplify and support Indigenous voices, the more effectively we can restore balance to the planet. Indigenous activists are at the forefront of global environmental protection, using their deep-rooted ecological knowledge and leadership to defend land, water, and biodiversity. Despite facing significant challenges, they continue to fight against deforestation, extractive industries, and climate injustice while advocating for Indigenous rights and environmental sustainability. One prominent leader, Nemonte Nkimo, a Waorani leader from Ecuador, successfully led a legal battle against oil drilling in the Amazon rainforest, securing a historic court ruling that protected 500,000 acres of indigenous land. Her efforts not only safeguarded biodiversity, but also set a precedent for indigenous land rights across the region. Similarly, the Standing Rock Sioux tribe's resistance against the Dakota Access Pipeline in the United States became a global movement, highlighting the critical need to protect water sources from industrial contamination. Their protest, known as #NoDAPL, inspired widespread activism and brought attention to indigenous sovereignty over natural resources. Beyond activism, indigenous-led conservation initiatives are shaping large-scale environmental policies. The Great Bear Rainforest Agreement in Canada, a landmark agreement between Indigenous nations, environmental groups, and the government, protects 6.4 million hectares of temperate rainforest. This collaborative model incorporates indigenous stewardship practices, demonstrating how traditional ecological knowledge can guide sustainable development while preserving ecosystems. Across the globe, indigenous leaders continue to advocate for climate justice at international forums. The Indigenous Peoples Caucus at the United Nations Climate Change Conferences amplifies indigenous voices in policy making, pushing for the recognition of indigenous land stewardship as a key strategy in combating climate change. These stories illustrate that indigenous communities are not just historical sources of wisdom, they are active, vital leaders in today's fight for a sustainable future. By supporting indigenous-led initiatives, recognizing land rights, and integrating indigenous knowledge into global climate policies, we can create a more just and resilient world. So, what can we do to support Indigenous communities and learn from their wisdom? First, educate yourself. Read books, follow Indigenous activists, and support Indigenous-led conservation efforts. If you can, donate to organizations that protect Indigenous land rights and advocate for their voices to be included in environmental policies. And of course, if you love what we do at Green Earth Essentials, consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/Green Earth Essentials. Your support helps us continue sharing vital sustainability knowledge with the world. That's it for today's episode. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, true sustainability means listening to those who have cared for the earth for generations. See you next time on Green Earth Essentials. This is Michelle Jackson signing off.